Happy Social Work Month, everyone. The theme is the time is right for social work. So the time is right for you. We as social workers, we know that we're in high demand. And so the time is right for you. And so thank you for joining today's conversation. It's such a very interesting and exciting topic. And we will talk about sports and social work. And at this moment, I would like to turn it over to our very own Daphne, our Associate Dean Kane, to do a hearty welcome. Dean Kane.
All right. Thank you so much. I think someone might have their volume on. Make sure your volume is off because we do get some feedback from that. But thank you so much, Sharon, and Roll Tide. It is absolutely wonderful to see everyone. How many? Oh my gosh, we have 125 people with us today. It is fantastic. I am very excited about this topic because I know there are a large group of social workers who are becoming very interested in social work in sports. We have a number of students here at this university, and I know there are students across the country and probably internationally who are interested in this particular field of social work. So there's growing research in this area. There is a great deal of interest among students. There is course development happening around this topic. And we here at Alabama, we sure do like our athletics and our student athletes. So it's wonderful that we can have this conversation here today. I want to thank the presenters for coming today. I want to thank the committee, Ms. Sharon Wilkes, who oversees our Noontime Knowledge, Ms. Lindsay Johnson, who is our events coordinator, Ms. Kimberly Gibson, who herself works in the area of social work in sports and is also with our field team. Thank you so much. I'm probably missing some folks, but you are appreciated. So let's get going. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you, Associate Dean Kane. Again, the time is right for social work. The time is right for you. The time is right for us to learn more about sports and social work. And so I would like to introduce our moderator for today, and she is our very own Kimberly Gibson. She currently serves as the MSW Field Coordinator for the School of Social Work at the University of Alabama, where she's responsible for managing the field-related components of the Elephant Plan cohort. Additionally, Kimberly serves on the social work and the university-wide committees and focuses on promoting social and economic justice in the field. Kimberly is a proud alumni of the University of Alabama, as she received both her degrees, BSW and MSW degrees, at the capstone. Her practice experience includes working with both for-profit and nonprofit organizations, focusing on mental health, counseling with children in hospice social work, and volunteerism. Her interests include field education, sport, social work, international social work, and workforce development. Kimberly also serves on the Alliance for Social Workers. And are you ready for Rumble, Kimberly? Let's do it. I kick it off to Kimberly Gibson to get us started with our noontime knowledge on sports and social work. Kimberly.
All right, greetings everyone and Roll Tide. Thank you, Professor Wilkes, for that introduction and that super fun transition for today's noontime knowledge. As Professor Wilkes shared, I am Kimberly Gibson, and I'm excited to be here today with our sports social work experts, and I cannot wait to introduce everyone to them. So first in our lineup, we have Dr. Brian Anderson, who is a professor of social work at Jackson State University. He serves as a Council on Social Work Education site visitor and a two-term appointed member of CSWE's Commission on Educational Policy. In addition, Dr. Anderson has served as an elected board member of the Association of Baccalaureate Program Directors. He completed a 3-year term as a member of the CSWE Council on Leadership Development. He is a founding member of the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports and is a past elected board member of the National Association of Social Workers, the Mississippi chapter. Dr. Anderson is a member of leadership of Greater Jackson, and before arriving at JSU, Dr. Anderson was the social work program director at Mississippi College. Furthermore, he has served in the U.S. Army National Guard as a dental specialist and the U.S. Army Reserve as a Medical Combat Service Support Commissioned Officer in which he served as the unit's executive officer. Brian was granted the Social Work Educator of the Year in 2009, 2014, and 2019 by the Alabama-Mississippi Social Work Education Conference. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for being with us today. Next in our lineup is our very own Dr. Danny Bennett. Dr. Bennett is an interdisciplinary researcher with direct social work practice experience, developing an integrative framework for the study of chronic exposure to urban stress among vulnerable populations in general and African-American males in particular. Dr. Bennett has initiated a program of research which addresses gaps in social work research and practice with African-American males and incorporates an interdisciplinary focus which transcends social welfare policy and practice. His preliminary findings have been presented at elite senior interdisciplinary research conferences. Further, these findings have been published in top social work research journals, and he has also been an expert manuscript reviewer for social work and other disciplinary journals, including Research on Social Work Practice, Criminology and Public Policy, and the Journal of Black Psychology. Dr. Bennett co-edited a special issue of Research on Social Work Practice, which focused on African-American males. We appreciate you serving on the panel today, Dr. Bennett. All right, our third panelist for today is Kelly Montadero. Coach Kelly is a licensed social worker in the state of Indiana, and she is a sports social worker that currently serves as the athletic counselor in the Office of Counseling and Sports Psychology within the Indiana University Athletic Department. Coach Kelly has been invited to present to the University of Michigan School of Social Work for multiple mini sessions and the Indiana School Social Work Association's conference on her own practices within athletics. Kelly is an award-winning track and field coach and has been coaching for 20 years with expertise in teaching middle school students how to do high knees without looking like baby giraffes, all the way to high school team state championship titles, including individual state championship titles and many accolades in between. Kelly is an award-winning social worker, having worked in a variety of settings, including an outdoor wilderness camp, a mental health organization, and in public education. She is a founding member of the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports and remains an active member now. In her spare time, Kelly also enjoys the sunshine, the color orange, laughing until crying, doing anti-racist work, and trying to learn Spanish. Welcome, Coach Kelly, and thanks for being here. Last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Matt Moore. So Dr. Matt Moore is an associate professor and chair in the Department of Social Work at Ball State University. Dr. Moore is a former NCAA tennis player and current college coach at Anderson University. Dr. Moore's research focuses on the integration of social work in sports from a macro perspective. Dr. Moore wrote the first ever social work in sports textbook, which was released in 2018, and has several publications on sports social work, and additionally has presented at over 36 national and international conferences. Dr. Moore is a founding member of the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports and the founder and editor of the Sports Social Work Journal. Dr. Moore was the recipient of the 2017 Excellence in Teaching Award at Ball State University and was a 2019 Fulbright Scholarship Award. He teaches macro social work courses covering policy, research, and nonprofit development. Dr. Moore earned his bachelor's from Hanover College and his MSW and PhD from Indiana University. Again, we appreciate you being here today, Coach Matt. So as we get started with our great playbook of questions, I want to thank each of you for being here and for being willing to share your knowledge with us. For our attendees, we also want to hear from you, so please use that chat feature to get questions to us for the Q&A that'll happen later in the hour. For our first question for our Rockstar panelists, we thought we'd start with a routine layup of a question focusing on what sports social work is. We know that this is a rapidly growing area in the field of social work, and I'm sure we have attendees with varying levels of knowledge of what sports social work is. So to start us off, how do you define sports social work, and what drew you to this practice or research area? Who wants to go first?
I'll put Matt on the spot as our textbook writer. So Matt, you can go first. Well, thanks, Dr. Anderson. Professor Gibson, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much to everybody that is taking time out of their day to spend a little bit of time with us. So I'm extremely excited to be a part of this panel. I've got a very soft spot in my heart for the University of Alabama. I've worked with a lot of field students through sports social work arrangements at Alabama, though I'm a diehard Florida Gator fan. So it is a little bit painful in that regard, but I suppose we can overlook our allegiance to Roll Tide versus Go Gators. But, we look at sports social work as really being the intersection between the field of athletics and the profession of social work. And when you think about the variety of different things that social workers come across day in and day out in their direct practice, there are a lot of similarities that go along with what athletes are experiencing or members of an athletic team are experiencing as well. So we look at sports social work as having micro components, which is something that Professor Montadero will be able to speak more eloquently about in the sort of clinical capacity in which she's working with athletes at Indiana University, all the way up to how can we inform and shape policy and organizational documents related to athlete health and well-being, which are things that the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports has been very active in with some of the NCAA documents, work through the NAIA, work through the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and a bunch of other platforms that are out there. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to how as social workers can we provide the level of care that is necessary to look after the safety and the well-being for athletes that I will wholeheartedly argue with anybody really do fall into that vulnerable category of social work clients with the stress, pressure, exploitation, and other factors that they face day in and day out.
Thanks, Coach Matt. Dr. Bennett, do you want to add to that?
Well, I think what I'd like to add, and I guess, kind of take things up a notch, is some of the challenges that the profession of social work faces with regards to sports and social work. And I think those challenges are multifaceted. So first, along the lines of what Dr. Moore stated, requires education and awareness of the ways in which social work can serve as a complement to athletic programs. And I'm speaking primarily, at the college level. And I think also, as social workers, the social work profession has to find a way, if you will, to become comfortable being a part of a multidisciplinary team within an athletic context. And also demonstrate how social work skills and practice can be applied to some already existing roles within athletic programs. And for social work itself, I think we have to come to be comfortable and embrace a new domain of professional practice.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Bennett. Coach Kelly, I know that Dr. Moore referenced you early in your clinical work there at Indiana University. Do you want to speak to a little bit of that and kind of your roadmap of how you landed in a sports social work setting?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the opportunity again. Kimberly, good to see you. Dr. Moore, good to see you as well. So for me, it was about how I've been coaching track and field for 22 years. And I realized really quickly that a lot of the social work interventions I was learning in grad school were really, really valuable with my student athletes. And so I started integrating practices of, strength-based things and just a lot of our social work sort of values and core pillars into my athletic team, and realized that I was having a lot of success with that. And so my version or my idea of social work, sports social workers and social workers in sports looks a lot like taking all of the knowledge that I have as a social worker and integrating that knowledge into the minds and brains of student athletes. And that's what I do on a daily basis. I'm in a clinical setting with student athletes 8 hours a day. We do some work with teams, obviously, as well, but the majority of my practice is spent doing clinical interventions, social work interventions with student athletes. And so that's kind of been my path. And I feel like one of the one of the things that Dr. Bennett, is that, it just says your first name, Danny. So I don't want to, but I want to be respectful of your doctoral title. You've earned that.
Right.
But I think that it's really important to think about what we add to the table that isn't already there in athletics. And I think we add a really holistic view. I think we add a person-centered approach. And I think that we add an advocacy piece that is very necessary that a lot of other disciplines don't add.
I think that's such a great point, Kelly, and thinking about what are we bringing to the table as social workers. As Sharon let us know very early today, the time is right for social work, and what does that look like in the sports arena? Dr. Anderson, I do want to give you an opportunity too to respond to this initial question as we're just setting the stage for sports social work.
Yeah, so I'll just add another perspective. I was a prior athlete, and I was a AAU basketball coach, college basketball coach as well, Division II level. And what was very interesting is that I found that I was doing social work even prior to this concept coming up. I think about the theoretical perspective and the person in the environment, the reality therapy, social learning theory, and that approach in working with athletes, because many of them came from various backgrounds, and we can use that perspective to help connect the dots with them, understand them, and also maximize their performance on the basketball court. So that's a different twist from what was mentioned earlier, but I think the participants can see the well-roundedness that this profession actually has.
Yeah, I think we owe a great thank you to the founding members of the Alliance in Social Work and Sports. I can relate to what you said, Dr. Anderson, about doing this before this platform was kind of here and identified. And, you know, sports is one of those things that unifies everyone. It's kind of a universal language. And so to be able to incorporate sports or to use social work in a sports setting can certainly bring people together, and those skills are transitional across those platforms. So I think having the Alliance and having this organization that focuses just on this for resources and just for awareness about sports social work is very important. So thanks to, we have several of those founding members here today with us, and there's a core group of them that are fabulous. So y'all have touched on so many different things with social work, it's hard to know where to go next, but I think I want to kind of circle back to those social work skills. Coach Kelly was talking about those earlier and the way that she's used all of the social work skills that she's learned in her practice. So if y'all want to touch on that, both from the educational perspective for those that are in education and teaching in the classroom, to what you see in your practice as well, how complementary social work is and those skills to what we're doing, and maybe just dive a little bit deeper into what we're adding to the table when social work is here in the different sports arenas, from, well, we'll get to this later too, from youth sports kind of through that professional level and beyond.
I'm happy to start and then to pass the baton on to whoever would like to go next. So, you know, I think when we think about the concept of sports social work, you really have to think about it in all the different phrases and phases that you all go through within your educational journeys or within the delivery of, you know, teaching in the classroom. So we think about sports social work from a practice lens, we think about it from a theoretical lens, we think about it from a research lens, and we think about it from a policy lens. So in the lessons and the skills that we learn through the CSWE competencies and through other techniques and tactics that are out there really speak to the fact that social workers can come to this sport arena without having the mindset of just being purely competitive focused. And instead, as Professor Montadero mentioned, that we come to it with a holistic viewpoint of understanding that yes, competition is a key portion of the lives of athletes, but it's not the only thing that identifies who they are as individuals. And social workers, through the theoretical lenses that we use, such as strength-based models, systems theories, ecological perspectives, empowerment models, to the direct clinical practice skills that we use, and even our ability to analyze and to develop policy, all goes into making the sports social work field, really something that can be truly dynamic within any athletic setting, whether it be working at the community-based level with rec leagues, all the way up to working with elite level performers through work that we've done with the USOPC or other organizations like that.
Thank you. I invite all of our panelists just to kind of jump in and respond and share their thoughts.
Yeah, I think from the clinical perspective, I think it's all of the things that Dr. Moore mentioned as far as like theoretical orientation. So my theoretical orientation is CBT, which is really, really valuable when we talk to athletes about mindset training and mental skills training for performance. But I think the other part of that, and I think what sets us apart as social workers, I work alongside a sports psychologist. And so we have he and I tussle a lot about just those differences. And so his lens is more of I think of a science lens, whereas I think my lens is more of a human lens. And I just think that's a difference in curriculum and in training. And so my training specifically, I don't want to broad stroke social work training, but my training specifically was much more of a person-centered lens. And so we talk a lot about, we talk athletically, we talk academically, and we talk personally, because those are the three areas specifically for college athletes that we really hone in on. And those are the ones that are usually on fire the most in their everyday lives. And so just figuring out and looking, what does that CBT model look like in direct practice? How do our systems impact all of the things that we do? So our immediate system, our team, our athletic department, our community. And so all of those things for me specifically in clinical practice are really, really relevant. And those are all, they look different obviously in everyday practice, but when we name those big sort of title models, like those are the practices that we use on a regular basis with our athletes that are most effective. And I think in any setting, right? Like in a school setting, they're effective. In a medical setting, they're effective. But really specifically, as we focus on sport, a lot of that mindset training aligns so closely when we talk about CBT and theoretical framework and systems, and how all of when one part of the spider web moves, the whole spider web moves. So I think it's really fun for me from a clinical lens to see all of those things sort of come into practice and come to fruition, and how much of an advantage we have as social workers with that knowledge to use those things. Because I think a lot of times you think it's only sports psychology or it's only mental skills or performance training. And I think a lot of that training is naturally gifted to us in our education. And we don't have to go above and beyond to do that sort of training and understanding for the performance level, if that makes sense. I'm open for any feedback if there are questions about that, but those are my initial thoughts based on what Dr. Moore has said.
I think it's important to make the distinction, just like we talk about sports and social work, and because we are closely related to psychology, and people say, well, you have sports psychologists. Well, I think it's important to make a distinction that much of sports psychology focuses on on-field performance, getting in the zone, and those kinds of things, and staying in the zone, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to make the distinction and delineate how sports social work differs from sports psychology. More like you said at the outset, Dr. Montadero, a more holistic approach. And so I think it's important to be cognizant of that, and that again, showing the value and utility of social work in the athletic context.
I'll just add briefly from a non-clinical perspective. I more of an indirect or of a macro approach, because some of the same ways can be embedded with the student athletes as it relate to exposing them to community activities, even legislation, and learning how how those laws and things will impact them as far as mental health, other health related issues. So just like Coach Matt and I call her Coach Kelly mentioned here, they spoke more of a clinical perspective, but there are also ways in which you can approach social work in sport from a macro perspective as well.
Thank you all. I think y'all covered some important topics like Dr. Anderson, just, looking and following up on what Dr. Moore said about social work and looking at all the different, I think you said phrases and phases. So we're looking, at the practice area, the theoretical area, the research area, and then that policy area with the macro work. And then again, as Coach Kelly was talking about that systems theory and Dr. Bennett with the difference between what sports psychology may be focusing on and then what social workers are bringing to that table and looking at the athlete as a whole person and how the different systems are impacting them and what they do to impact those systems. So I think those are very important distinctions, and thank y'all for sharing that. I think we would be remiss if we did not touch on March Madness while we are here talking about sports social work on the 23rd of March in the heart of the NCAA tournament. So we know just in general that student athletes are facing many pressures and they manage a variety of expectations and responsibilities in their role as students and family members and athletes. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about our mental health with athletes and focusing on that. Again, from the youth sports, when we're talking elementary, middle school to our high school, our college athletes to professional and on, looking at those different arenas. And so perhaps we can start with you, Dr. Anderson, with your experience as a basketball coach, and what type of mental health issues do you foresee our student athletes facing? Basketball in particular right now with the tournament going on, and then just in general as various sports kind of have their critical times in competition as well.
Thanks, Kim. So actually right now during March Madness, with basketball per se, there are AAU tournaments and everything are actually cranking up as well for the youth. And AAU right now is extremely large. I mean, they are traveling now from state to state, from region to region to play games. So this is not only a bearing on those student athletes, but also bearing on those families, because they have to take time off from work. They have to travel and spend and get hotels to really support those kids. The comparison between that and March Madness, and they experience very similar traits. One is being seriously overwhelmed. They still have school, just like the people, those kids in March Madness. One thing that I saw very differently this time with March Madness, it seemed as though that the selection committee tended to select or place teams that are in the same region in some way. I know at Jackson State, we actually played LSU, our women's team. So that travel time could actually lessen the burden of having to travel to California for the first round. Also, these kids are burned out. Those younger kids and going to school, playing their team sport at school, then having to go quickly to AAU, same way with those NCAA teams. They have to they're excited about it, but they have to also go to the NCAA tournament. They also have, I think, the CBI, NIT. So there's a number of postseason play they actually have. And the last thing I'll speak about, because I know you have to get to the other panelists, is mental exhaustion. And those are things that all of them actually have. And I hope at some point coaches and hopefully other sports social workers can help defray some of those traits that these kids are actually going through.
I'll add to what Dr. Anderson shared, talking a little bit more specifically about some positive youth development models that are really important for our understanding within the field of youth athletics. Obviously, athletes continue to progress throughout their life, and some of them have the fortune of playing in high school, and some have the fortune of playing in college, and so on. But it really does start with our ability to connect youth athletes with the types of resources and the models that are necessary to help them adjust to and to acclimate the pressures that athletics can put on there. So there are a handful of different models that are out there. There's two that I really like. One is referred to as the SETS model. It's one that Ohio State uses with their life sports program, but it really tries to teach self-control, effort, teamwork, and social responsibility through the utilization of sport. And then there's another model that's out there that's called the Learner's 5C model, which looks at ways in which sport can help with athletes with elements of connection, caring, competence, confidence, community, and contribution. So ways in which we can help these athletes develop the life skills that are necessary that could ideally carry them into high school competition, and then even further into collegiate level competition, and if they're fortunate enough, even beyond that as well. But to me, it really does start at that youth level. And I think it's one that as sports social workers, or just social workers in general, that we really have to make sure that we're doing what we can to foster those relationships and those life lessons early on, because we know that those are going to progress throughout.
So if I could add, I think, March Madness, college football playoffs, college baseball World Series, I think it's important to recognize that these are athletes, but these athletes are people too. And so if we're talking about March Madness, fun for everyone to fill out their brackets and that kind of thing. And sports generally is, where you spend your disposable income, it's entertainment, it's leisure. But for these athletes, it's very serious. And it doesn't just get serious in March. It doesn't just get serious, in August when there's football season. So there's a lot of pressure there. And actually, for many of these athletes, particularly those that are playing on that level, that pressure has, it started a long time ago, when they were pre-adolescent, because a lot of them have been doing this for a long time, and it is absolutely a part of their self-identity and how they identify and define themselves. And so there's great internal pressure to perform, and then there's external pressure to live up to these expectations. So it's really important. And Matt, you're talking about like theoretical models and stuff. You think about the sport ethic model and how what is called positive deviance, but over conforming to that sport ethic model. So you're working harder because you want to be the best. You want to keep your spot. That leads to burnout, and then it has serious implications, if not ramifications, for mental health issues. So once again, demonstrating how having a holistic approach, being a keen observer, and understanding how these processes work is how social work can complement athletic context.
I will be the caboose on the train for this one and just say, one of the things that I think is really important, and we talk a lot to our athletes about during this sort of crazy season, or championship season is what we call it at IU. I'm sure lots of other places also call it that, but just the idea that consistency is really important. And so we have a lot of times what will happen is, it's championship season, like coaches are like, what do we do now? What do we do next? What are we doing now? How are we making this better? And it's like, well, no, we start in August for our spring sports to develop consistency and healthy boundaries and good coping skills and pre-performance routines and all those things. And so I think that one of the things that we try to reiterate, which is also healthy for us as practitioners, so I want to make sure that I say that, good self-care, is that we're taking good care of ourselves, that we're being consistent, that we're using our pre-performance routines, that we are eating regular meals, that we're drinking enough water, all of those things. And so I think that I think that outside of the sport world, people think that like we need to make some big dramatic changes when championship season comes or when this pressure arises right now, versus like, how are we consistently building skills throughout our regular off-season, post-season practices, all those things. How are we developing habits? And as social workers, how are we teaching those things so that during the stressful times that the students have the skills, and so that the anxiety decreases, the depression symptoms decrease, medications are managed, we're consistent with those things. So I think from a clinical lens and being up in our elbows, with kids right now in championship season, the message that we have is controllable variables and consistency. And what do those things look like? And how do those habits benefit? And how do we promote, again, if we're working with teams, like how do we promote that as team culture? It's really normal to have these pre-practice and pre-performance routines. And how does that benefit our culture and our mental health and decrease anxiety and decrease depressive symptoms? Those tend to be, Kimberly, kind of going back to what you were asking earlier, those tend to be the two things that we are seeing a lot of, that we are seeing the most of as far as like DSM diagnosable criteria would be like generalized anxiety and major depressive disorder.
Kim, my add to Coach Kelly's comment there. As a basketball coach, we have to also be able to think creatively how to move these athletes throughout postseason. They are things with having self-care time and even bonding activities. And, sometimes as coaches, we think bonding has to come on the preseason side, but it also could come in the postseason. So we have to be creative and also change what we do, some of our normal practices, to really get them to perform at a higher level.
Thank you. I think that there's just a wealth of information that y'all have provided through that. I think one of the themes that I heard through that was supporting athletes. And I heard that from the very beginning when we're talking about youth sports and recognizing that it's not just an athlete that's showing up on a collegiate stage or an AAU basketball game that is traveling and competitive, and, thinking about the sacrifice and the investment from families and neighborhoods and communities working with athletes throughout that trajectory. So how do you see that people can best support athletes through these different stages? So whether it's parents or neighbors, sports social workers, coaches, how can we best support athletes to help reduce that burnout and to maybe alleviate some of that external pressure, knowing that, a lot of us that are athletes have this internal drive and the high expectations that we have, but how can we best support athletes in those different levels to help mitigate some of those concerns and promote positive mental health?
Well, I think it's important, kind of go back to some, basic social work principles in terms of establishing a rapport, having ongoing relationships with athletes, not in the sense that something's going on, then, the social worker pops up, but really integrated and really a part of the athletic culture. So you have that rapport, you have those relationships so that where intervention is needed, you don't have those hurdles, if you will, to address, because they know who you are, they're comfortable with you, you have a relationship with them. And I think, dispelling myths about your role or what it is that you do, and also just the general taboo or stigma that's attached to mental health, I think it's perhaps even amplified among in the athletic context. It's only been recently in the last few years that athletes have been very transparent about some of their mental health issues. But in years past, you were really ostracized, marginalized, and seen as weak if you talked about the pressures or dealing with stress or some mental illness or crises. So I think that's really important.
I think just to keep that sort of train going, just the idea that a lot of our students come from places where they experience immense pressure. So a lot of them are playing on a full ride because that's the only way they're going to go to college, or a lot of them are playing because their parents are saying, like, you have got to do this thing. And so I think part of the idea is, like, you know, if we're talking at a parental level, I think we've got to remember that we're a parent first, right? That we're their parents first. We're not their coach first. We're not their way to college first. We're their parent first. And how do we support them without our intentions being to get them to play better or to perform better or to agree to be on this team? So I think that's one of the things. And I think that also can be with us as social workers or as coaches. I think our students need it. I always think of, like, I advocate for my students and tell them all the time, your safety and your health are the two most important things to me. And in that position as a social worker, it's all confidential services, right? So I don't go talk to coach, I don't talk to parents or roommates, teammates, anybody. And so I think, how do we approach athletes that we engage with, whether we're a social worker, a coach, a parent, a professor, how do we approach them without requiring anything of them at a certain level, because there are so many demands placed on them in all other areas of their life. And I think that can be a difficult role as a coach. And I think it can be a difficult role as a parent, but there's got to be a time where they feel safe enough with us as adults in their lives that they can be honest about whatever they're struggling with. And I think we've got to be willing to sacrifice or set aside our own intentions during certain situations and conversations in order to provide them a safe space. And also that we're not going to use that information against them, right? So that we're not going to not let them play. We're not going to not let them go to this basketball practice because of this. So we have to be in a position where we're very unbiased, non-judgmental, and very safe and supportive, because I don't know that a lot of humans feel that way, that they have that space, honestly. But I know for a fact that a lot of athletes do not feel like they have that, because everyone is always requiring or demanding something from them. And so how do we put ourselves in a posture that just says, and I think this is where social work comes in. How do I walk alongside you and meet you where you are? And how do we figure out how to get you where you need to be when you're ready to get there?
The only thing that I would add to what's been shared by my fellow panelists is training and education, I think, is really important in this space. And, you know, that's training and education on things such as mental health literacy, the impact that adverse childhood experiences can have on athletes that are growing up. I mean, as somebody that is a current, you know, NCAA tennis coach, we don't get trained on this type of stuff. I'm fortunate in the fact that I have a social work background and I have an understanding of what it looks like. But if I didn't, I'd be fully lost, right, with how to respond to and how to help athletes. And, you know, I spent over a decade at the varsity high school coaching level, and it's even less training at the high school level than it is at the collegiate level. So a lot of it really boils down to what are we doing to train and to educate individuals on what the true reality of being an athlete is. And the secondary component to that is, you know, how can we, going back to Dr. Anderson, because I share that same macro perspective from a policy and from an advocacy perspective, what can we do? I look at the chat and I see the situation about Katie Meyer at Stanford and Harry Miller. What can we do to utilize unfortunate situations and stories like that to help push narratives in the way in which they need to be pushed, so that situations like that do not become commonplace within the field of athletics? So while we talk about Katie Meyer because it's gained national attention, on the opposite end of that, we know that Katie Meyer is not the only athlete that's committed suicide this year across the country or across the world, right? So what can we be doing to better advocate at the larger level and the larger scale to ensure access to resources, awareness of resources, and really the acceptability of resources, so that athletes and others in that athletic environment understand that it's acceptable to have vulnerabilities in your life, and that to seek help for those vulnerabilities really only makes you stronger as a person in the end.
I just want to give sorry, Dr. Anderson, just really quickly, I just want to give a shout out to IU. Athletics has developed a mental health task force, and this year was the first year that we did a required mental health training for all student-facing staff members within our athletic department. So they had to come to a training with myself and my boss, and we did all kinds of destigmatizing, how to talk to people about committing suicide, how to get resources. So shout out to IU Athletics for like taking that bull by the horns. I'm also glad to share any of that information to other universities that feel like it would be valuable for their student-facing staff within athletics. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Anderson.
I think you must have just knew exactly what I was about to get ready to say, Coach Kelly. So I wanted to add to, well, I can add to what Coach Kelly and Coach Matt just mentioned. One quick thing is that athletic administration at the K through 12 level and in the college level, they really need to be meaningfully receptive to continuing education and training. I know as coaches, as a prior coach, some of our colleagues can be very stubborn about, hey, we don't need that, because especially when it comes to mental toughness and all of that, we would drive them to the end and say, hey, you can keep going. But I think that not only the coaches, but also even families need to be open to trainings on an ongoing basis, because these things change as years go on.
Thank y'all. That's some great things to think about in terms of supporting our student athletes. We'll transition to one more quick question and then head to the chat for some questions. So I know we've garnered a lot of interest for sports social work now. So for those of us that are here, can y'all talk about the types of jobs that are available for sports social work and maybe where to look for those as people are interested in pursuing that area?
I'm happy to start on this one. One, the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports keeps a job center on our website. I think the link to the website was put in the chat earlier on in our panel discussion, so you can check that out. I see jobs within the world of athletics as being kind of two ways, right? You've got a clinical component that goes along with it, and you have a non-clinical component. So certainly we know through research and a lot of research that have been done by individuals in this room that athletes do experience anxiety, major depression, eating disorders, sleep disorders, mood disorders, have experienced adverse childhood experiences that require some level of clinical intervention in order to ensure that they get the proper treatment that they need. We also know on the opposite end of sort of the clinical spectrum is this idea of trying to help athletes with life skill development, academic advising, career planning, financial literacy, working with individuals through like the transition periods within athletics. So when my college playing days come to an end and I don't go and play pro, what am I going to fill that extra time with? Where do I see myself fitting into the world now that this piece of who I am and this identity that I had is no longer taking center stage in who I am as a person? So there's a lot of different ways in which individuals, and especially in the social work field, can get involved within that. And that's why I think social workers are so great for the field of athletics, is because we have that diversity in our skill sets and our talent to be able to work on things from hey, let's help you figure out what your career is going to look like and prepare you with the life skills, all the way to the far end where I've got an athlete that is truly contemplating suicide and without immediate intervention runs the risk of being the next ESPN story and a tragic loss for the sport world and a family that's going to be distraught because they've lost a loved one.
Thanks, Coach Matt. Does anyone want to add to that?
I think I just would say, I totally agree. In our department, there's lots of places for social workers besides in a clinical office doing diagnosing and helping manage medication. I think the thing that is really valuable to think about is, and this is something that we've been talking about with the IU School of Social Work, because we're trying to get practicum students placed with us, is just like level of clinical training is really important. Like the idea, if you're going to be in a clinical setting, it's like being able to like having lots of knowledge about diagnosis and medication and like clinical experience. And so I think it's about figuring out too where you see yourself and where you see your skill set, and then figuring out where you fit in that sort of overarching that place. Like, if do you want to be doing clinical work every day with student athletes in an office? Do you want to be academic advising them? The other thing to think about too, and this is just from my own experience, is that I did school social work for a long time, and I also coached while I was in that building. And that was a really beautiful hybrid for me. And that it was really fun for me to do that, because I love being in an educational setting. I love school. Middle schoolers are my favorite, by the way. They're little wild animals and they're fantastic. But that allowed me to do school social work, and it also allowed me to use social work interventions with my track team. And so I think sometimes we get really too focused on, I can only be in college athletics. And I think there are lots of other ways. You can work at a community mental health center and also coach at the community mental health center. So I just think there are a lot of ways to do sport social work. And I think sometimes we get too laser focused on one thing. And so I think you can be creative in some of those ways, and using, like, Dr. Moore was saying, like, we have such a diverse skill set that there's lots of places that we can be of value where it integrates social work and sports.
Thanks, Coach Kelly. We can shift, unless Dr. Anderson or Dr. Bennett have anything they want to add. We will shift to the chat and look at some of these questions. I know we've talked a lot about mental health and addressing some of those questions. Let's see. All right, so this is probably opening a can of worms in our last few minutes, but one of our questions focuses on the name, image, and likeness policies that we've seen. So there have been a lot of discussions recently about athletes receiving compensation for their name, image, and likeness. After the NCAA ruling last year, do you see this as justice for student athletes? And is it a conversation that has impacted your social work practice?
I think, I was going to suggest that, we deal with that question, because it is, a can of worms, a Pandora's box, if you will. But on the one hand, you talk about the enormous revenue that those revenue producing sports, football and basketball primarily, generate for schools. And so in that way, students receiving compensation, seems like justice. But it's also exploitation, because now with the NIL being so wide open, more and more student athletes, there's potential for them to be exploited. I think some parameters have to be put on the NIL, because, now the rumblings is like whoever comes up with an NIL for a student athlete, that's who that athlete's going to sign with. The other part of it is it's so wide open. I have a friend whose 12-year-old son has an NIL deal because he's such an elite athlete. So now talk about the pressure of the internal pressure, the pressure to perform at the age of 12 years old, because you have this NIL deal and everyone sees you as the number one prospect in your age group, so on and so forth. So it can ultimately circle back around to having implications for the stress and the overtraining and all those, those kinds of things. So I think we really have to take a really careful look at how these NIL deals are structured, so as not to add on to the pressures and demands the student athletes are feeling, and so that they don't get exploited.
I want to add one quick thing to that. I know we have other questions we have to get to add to that conversation there. I think all parties need some sort of training, whether it's the kids, the families, and the coaches, on financial literacy. Because these kids will get money. Some of these kids come from backgrounds in which they haven't even had jobs or even get money, and to be able to manage it. A lot of these kids won't go pro. So they will gain money. Now, I see the positive side, but again, they also need to know how to manage it, not just the kids, but those who are around them.
And then just specifically to speak from a clinical lens, it's impacted my daily practice practice as a social worker because their questions come up. Is this the right thing? Should I do it? Is it the safe thing? Is this the only thing I'm going to get? And so from my lens in that clinical setting, it's, you know, I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but it's about sort of, Dr. Anderson, what you're speaking about literacy about it. Like, how do we make the best decision? How do we make sure this is the best decision? What are the ramifications of this decision? So I think that that's where our explorative, like, questioning and like line of thinking can be really valuable to our athletes, because we can help them develop some of those thought processes to ask some more in-depth questions about some of those things that are being offered or provided for them.
I don't have a ton to add that's not already been shared. I always look at this from like the dual views of exploitation. So for decades, right, athletes have been exploited for their talents and for their abilities in the collegiate sports setting. And certainly name, image, and likeness is a corrective action towards some of those levels of exploitation. But the whole idea of name, image, and likeness brings about new possibilities of exploitation with companies and organizations exploiting athletes. So it's a cyclical cycle, and I'm not convinced yet that we have it right when it comes to name, image, and likeness. I think there's still a lot to be learned and a lot to be developed with it. In my heart, I'm a believer in it, but I'm a believer in it with proper precautions and protections put into place for athletes, and I'm not convinced we're quite there yet.
So what I'm seeing is that this is a great area for advocacy for those that are interested in sports social work, in looking at the student athlete and the potential for exploitation, and to provide those skills in terms of financial literacy that Dr. Anderson was talking about. So this is a whole area where we can certainly impact our student athletes in a positive way through our focused efforts. So we have another great question I'd like to get to real quick before I turn it back over. And this question comes from Molly Dowd, and she is asking, how can those of us who don't have social work training, but are in student-facing positions like academic athletics, implement positive practices without overstepping our role, given that we don't have that formal training?
I would like to speak directly to this, being in a position where we get referrals from people. So Molly, thanks for the question. I think the thing that we can remember is that we just have to be humans, right? So we can be a supportive environment. We can be understanding. We can be, inquisitive and curious. And then I think the other part of that is just knowing what our limits are. So at what point is it time for me to refer to someone? At what point is it like, you know what, Sarah, that's a great thing that you probably should talk to someone in sports psych about. Like, here's an email that I can, let me send an email. And so I think it's, in your role in any supporting staff facing, student facing role, it's about being supportive, it's about being curious, and it's about being an understanding environment. I think it's also really important to know what your university or what your employment requires as far as reporting, and like where, what are you required to report? What are safety concerns, things of that nature? That's a really good thing to sort of flesh out. But I think the most important thing is like, be a caring human. That's why you do the work, and know what your own limits are as far as when it's time to refer, or like when it's required for you to make a report for a student's safety.
Now, the only thing I would add to that is just making sure that everybody's doing the training and education from an ongoing perspective. Obviously, sitting in a panel like this is a prime example of the ability to be able to do that. Oftentimes, we see in the world of sport that athletic trainers, academic advisors have a tendency to be some of the frontline individuals for mental and behavioral health concerns, whether they want to be or not. They are. If I'm sitting there getting treatment for an injury and I've got 45 minutes to sit and to do things, I'm going to talk. And when I talk, I'm going to give you information that is going to impact you in a multitude of different ways. I think, understanding what your professional roles are, being aware to what some of the warning signs are, and then knowing the proper chain to be able to get athletes connected with the help is certainly well within the responsibility of all of us to be able to do.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Any last minute thoughts or comments before we wrap up?
I'm just I wish we had more time. I like this group. We can go all day. I think someone said they had class. I mean, cancel class. Let's hang out all day and talk about this. I really enjoyed this opportunity, and I do appreciate the participants who came on board, at least, regardless of you had to be here for extra credit, you're loving it or whatever. Hopefully we can, we've said enough today that will spark some interest. If not for you, you can pass it on to others. So, and I'd like to also give kudos to Professor Wilkes, Dr. Kane, Kimberly. You did a great job with us today as well. So, and the panel. Yes, thank you so much.
Well, Dr. Anderson, there are some spaces and times where we can talk about this all day. Matt, do you want to take this opportunity to plug the annual symposium for the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports?
I'll plug whatever you need me to plug. So every year, the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports does a 2-day, full-day symposium. CEUs are offered. It's this year will be in Indianapolis. It's early October when that conference will take place. You can find more information on the website. We also offer a handful of different CEU and webinar trainings throughout the course of the year. Like we mentioned earlier, we just launched a brand new social work journal, which the link was put into the chat as well. So it's open access. So anybody has the ability to get to the articles and to read them. You don't have to pay to download them or anything like that. But certainly plenty of ways in which you can continue to find educational opportunities related to this field. And I think I speak for all the panelists in saying that any of us would be happy to lend some of our time to have additional conversations and provide whatever support that we can.
Well, I cannot thank you guys enough for being here today, for being Rockstar panelists, for sharing about sports social work. I know that we are a bit past our hour, which probably doesn't surprise anyone with a topic like this with so much interest. I also want to make sure that we thank Professor Wilkes and Lindsay Johnson and Peggy Trosper, who's going to help us with our CEUs, because these noontime knowledges would not be possible without them either. So many thanks to everyone here, and I am going to turn this over to Professor Wilkes now.
Thank you so much, Kimberly Gibson, and our esteemed panelists, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Matt Moore, Coach Montadero. Thank you so much for staying on the stage with us, and our very own Dr. Bennett. And before we leave, we have one special guest. He was my amazing student. His name is Najee Harris. Najee, would you like to share something with us? Najee is now with Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's our special guest this evening. So Najee, would you like to say a few words about sports and social work and what that volunteerism class did for you and what you're doing now with the Steelers? Najee.
Hello, thanks for having me. First of all, is Molly in here?
Yes, Molly is here with us.
Can Molly please say hello? Molly, where are you at?
I already asked a question. Thank you. I've been here the whole time.
I just wanted to hear your voice. Anyway, so yes, I do. But so I was a social worker, social work major, minor, right, Molly? Minor, right?
Yes.
And one thing that I've noticed about it is that, like, so me walking in there, I guess I was the only football player, I guess, and I was a male football player in there. I think that if we can do a better job of probably, like, promoting and telling probably more male athletes to get into social work, maybe that'll be like a big step, or probably in changing some things, probably helping out other people too, because maybe if they can relate to somebody who's probably in the sports, maybe they'll find a better way, I guess, to, I don't know, help things out. So that's one thing that I noticed, but I always wanted to help other people. So social work was something I always wanted to do. Me being an athlete too, I knew that there might be some people going through the same stuff that I went through going through when I was, I'm sorry, I just finished my workout, so I'm kind of trying to catch my breath right now. So I figured out there might be some players or some people that probably went through some stuff that I did, and maybe that if they see that, like, I can relate to them, maybe they'll open up more. So me going to the classes there in social work, I actually learned a lot too about stuff that I didn't even know about. And I had the opportunity to help out other organizations. I had the opportunity to just expand and learn more stuff about just the social work and what it provides. I feel like, that's something that around campus it needs to be talked about a lot more, is just how important it is and how much stuff that you guys do in there that actually helps out other people. I volunteered a lot. I had fun of my time being there. So now that I'm with the Steelers, I have my own nonprofits. I help out other things. My nonprofit focus on homelessness, hunger. I did a couple things in my community, the Bay Area, where I renovated homeless shelters. I help pass out food every now and then. I'm having my own bank, my own food bank. At the high school that I went to, my high school gave me a small portion of like the high school where I could turn it into a food bank. I have other organizations coming in there, so it's going to not be mine. It can be like a various amount of people. And right next to my high school is a middle school and elementary school. And, you know, I tell them all, like, you know, I talked to both schools and I said, you guys come up here, bring the kids up here. If anybody needs some food, if they want to be more quiet, you know, you can just bring them one-on-one, you know, if you don't feel comfortable being, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it or being around a lot of people, knowing the situation, whatever helps best. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I do. Even in Pittsburgh, I try to help out the communities out there. I'll try to do some in Alabama. But yeah, man, those are some of the stuff I did. And, you know, I feel like the social work, I learned so much there that, you know, that it helped me a lot to just know more things about, I guess, helping people out.
Yes, and then also, Naji, in the midst of a pandemic, you volunteered with the Boys and Girls Club and did amazing work with the youth there. And
That's
found
right.
a
You remember
way
that?
to do, yes, I
Yeah,
do remember
that's right.
that. Yes,
That's
and
right.
so you did amazing in terms of giving back and even on the macro level in social work. So thank you again, Naji, for joining us. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. Our moderator, we could not have done it without our very own Kimberly Gibson and our attendees. And so this is a special treat to have Naji, and we know that you're so busy with all that you have going on and everyone else who joined us today. And so in terms of our program evaluation and our CEUs, we will send that out to you no later than Friday. And any other questions or any closing thoughts before we depart? We're 6 minutes over our time.
Hey, Molly's the best, man. Y'all gotta get in contact with Molly. She can help you out in so many ways. Shout out to Molly, man. You helped me graduate from college. Molly is the best.
Can I say one thing to Naji while we still have him?
Yes.
What up?
Can you hear me? What's going on, Naji? How you doing? I'm an LSU graduate, but I've been following you with Coach Saban for the whole time. I think you can be a very big star for us with social work, with sports social work from your platform. I know you're very busy, and whether you're a minor or a major, I mean, just you have that presence. You could help us out with that part. Not putting more work on you, but just a thought.
It ain't nothing but work, man. Ain't nothing I can handle. But what are some things that I can help out with? I'm interested in that.
Well, we'll get with Professor Wilson. We'll talk more about it. But continue the good work at Pittsburgh. I like your coach, Mike Tomlin. We got to find a quarterback though. Okay.
Thank you all so much. We're about to transition into another meeting, but thank you all. This event could not have been possible without everyone in attendance. And so mark your calendars for Social Workers Political on March the 30th, and you'll hear more about that. So stay tuned, follow us on social media. And then if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. Again, the time is right for social work. Thank you for a great panel. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Excuse me, Ms. Gibson, how do we get our hours for CEUs?
Yes, you receive an email from us. You receive an email from us about the evaluation and your CEU this week.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for coming.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Roll Tide.